Because fundamentally, I do not believe an advertising model will work with an answer engine. But fundamentally, I think it will convert 10 times more purchases than Google. Why? Because when I want a Patagonian backpack at the best price that can be delivered to me tomorrow, I want to use an answer engine. But I don't call it advertising. It's the ability to purchase. They should be shopping engines.
Hi, welcome to the Media Copilot. It's a podcast that dives into how AI is changing media, news, and communication. I'm your host, Pete Pachal. I covered tech for a long time as a journalist, and now I have deep discussions with the media players, the builders, and the creators who are answering the question, how will we get information in the future, and how will that change the practice of news gathering and the business of media? I'm excited this week to talk to someone who sits right at the collision point between AI and the business model publishers have relied on for over a decade. It's Colin Jeavons, founder and chairman of Nomix Group, a company built around commerce tech for brands, publishers, and app and creator ecosystems. Colin's been in search and publishing long enough to have built personalized briefings before anyone called them that, and to have watched monetization shift from directories to 10 blue links to feeds and now to AI answers. He has forgotten more about online commerce and discovery than I've ever known, so he's exactly the right guy to talk to find out how people in the future will not just discover information, but how the economy of the web will turn that into cold, hard cash, and what slice of that publishers can expect. Colin, welcome to the Media Copilot.
Thanks, Pete.
Let's start with you and your journey, because I think it's a really interesting one. Tell us like the Cliff's Notes of that journey, how your experiences have shaped how you see search and media and commerce today.
Big question. Try and give it justice and keep it short and sweet. I guess I've worked in the publishing world for 30 years. The last 25 years of those have been in search technology. And, fundamentally search technology is about discovering content. People obviously recognize Google as a mechanism of searching and finding content. But there are many different business applications to search technology. And if you think about it, as the universe expands of content creation, your ability to discover that becomes more and more important. So my journey was I built the largest political publisher in Europe, late 1990s, early 2000s. So I was kind of a publisher.
Politico before Politico. Is that kind of like what it was?
Yeah, I was kind of a publisher, but what we did is we built all of the technology that wasn't available. We built content management systems, we built XML, we built contextualization algorithms, we built search engine algorithms, and we built them all to actually create content for elected representatives and government officials. So I've kind of come at it from many angles, as in I've been a publisher, I've employed many, many journalists, experts in their fields.
And thank you for
that. We were kind of, roll call, Congressional Quarterly, National Journal, Politico. We were everything. In fact, I almost bought Congressional Quarterly, but that's a different story. And moved to the US. But I ended up selling that in 2004 to a public company and then came to the US and focused on licensing technology for search, which I licensed to pretty much every publisher in the world. And then, another journey of, reverse the largest defense and intelligence technology off the NASDAQ. And so I've got a kind of unusual history of pre-web, being a publisher because I published magazines, newspapers, etc. And then as the web was becoming a light, developed technology with great engineers, where it was me saying, you need to be able to do this. And I'd employ engineers that build it. And then, I've been in search ever since that. So the whole journey, and sometimes it's easy to forget, with the benefit of hindsight, if you were sitting in the Industrial Revolution, you would say, gosh, it must have been amazing. But we're sitting in probably the biggest experiment that humankind has ever had.
You're talking about AI.
Well, we're talking about, the discovery of digital content. There were no mobile phones then. The digitalization of content. Let's get real. This podcast could be here for 1,000,000 years. What did I grow up with? A black and white photograph that could disappear of a couple of grandparents. So the revolution we've been in for 20, 25, 30 years, but 2026, I think, is a fundamentally different year, different world, because a lot of the technology that's been built over the course of the last 20 years, and I've been in AI, machine learning, natural language processing, entity extraction, semantic analysis for 15 of those years, it's now hitting consumers, hitting the business models. And so it's a pivotal year in the world of media, along with the fact it's a pivotal world to every consumer on the planet. Doesn't matter what business model you want to talk about.
Yeah, so you've been in it, like you say, since pre-web to all the way to AI, and that requires obviously a mindset of adaptation, of being on top of what's next and experimenting and figuring it out. That said, since you've been through so many different iterations from the web to Web 2.0 and social and mobile, et cetera, is there anything that's like, what would you say is like the through line that might link it all? Like what works back then that still might work today?
When you're looking in the benefit of hindsight, if we were, I know, historians looking at a war or a set of circumstances, you can see, things that occurred that were clear when you're looking at hindsight. Obviously, it's more difficult when you're in the middle of it. But fundamentally, I think there's a wave system occurring if you're talking about journalism, in that, the business model of journalism 30 years ago wasn't really that different to what it was. I originally used to publish a product called the Public Ledger, which was the oldest continuous running newspaper in the world, founded in 1763. The business model was fundamentally exactly the same. You create good content written by quality individuals, of which people pay for, or it's ad supported. That was it. That was the model. And what happened when you had web, the first web was all content is free, and the wave then was everybody wants to be a publisher, content becomes free. And then all of a sudden you enter the era of what content can I believe? What's correct? What isn't correct? What can I trust? What can I not trust? I think one of the interesting things over time is I believe that actually content will become expensive again, where in actual fact, quality journalism, even though has had a very difficult time over the course of the last 10 years, will actually become valuable again, where people will pay for premium-based products. I think it's one of the reasons why you see, a certain periodical or magazine publishers actually grow their subscription rates, like The Economist, etc. So where quality verticals will actually become, I'm happy to pay something I trust. The key is trust, and I'll pay for trust, because as there's more erosion in trust, that means people value trust more. And so I think we're in the middle of that evolution, that wave will come back.
Right. I think that's an interesting point, because it's like that is a thing that comes up a lot recently in studies, that broadly the trust in media is very low.
Yes.
But what I think people sort of overlook is, I think what you're getting at is the other side of that equation. Well, because it's so low, there's big demand for it. So if you can establish for it, there is large value to it. I think that's kind of like the equation that sort of results from that.
And I think also that people value their time more, in that, in a world where you can kind of work anywhere, if they're going to use any seconds of their day, then a certain audience will pay for quality. And, I think you'll see, frankly, high-level journalists, podcasters, content creators actually get rewarded without having to rely on fundamentally flawed business models like, advertising or sponsorship, where there's always been a gray line between, what's ad supported and what's not supported, what's real and what's not real. Paying for a product means you get high quality, and frankly, it's less easily influenced to somebody's desired outcome.
Well, let's talk about the AI layer in here now that exists today, right? So, I completely agree with everything you said, which is to say, if you can establish that trust and you have the quality content and the quality work, people will pay for it. And there's lots of evidence of that. That said, now that AI is in the ecosystem, you have this disintermediation layer that, basically harvests content more or less for free, serves up some version of it, a reversioned, remixed, summarized version of it to audiences. And for the vast majority of publishers out there, there's not really a compensation mechanism. Sure, if you're a big player, you can call up OpenAI and get some kind of licensing deal or whatever. Maybe, although those have kind of dried up a little bit, I feel like, over the last 6 months. And we can talk about that too. But just broadly, and the conventional wisdom is that, oh, this is bad, and because it's wrecking the CPM advertising layer and maybe even reducing audience that could find you for subscriptions. Is that true? What are the nuances of this new way people discover information that may be beneficial to publishers or better for them? But also, let's just sort of pick apart the sort of broader assumptions around this, and where can publishers sort of follow paths to success with AI in the middle?
I think you can, if we were detectives, being a detective always kind of starts with who's got the motive. And,
okay.
If you look at the motive in publishing, it's money. How do you build the business? And when you go back to the fundamentals of, there's only ever been two businesses models for publishing, and that is paid for content or ad supported. Then you look at the ad supported model, irrespective of the content, and you got a really big problem. Because when you've got an ability to, even with UGC content from social media, the average consumer is spending 4.5 hours online, of which a very significant portion of that is in social media. Well, from a publisher's perspective, that's free content. All right. Look at Facebook. It's free content created by somebody else, and I have an ad-supported model next to it. And I make a lot of money and a great margin from that because I don't have content creation costs. However, when you then add the fact that AI content can create avatars, more influencers, but also video content at scale and speed that's never been able to be created before, what you have is a big bang mechanism occurring where the acceleration of the stars of content is accelerating at high velocity, the fastest velocity in history. And you've got a bucket of money called a CPM advertising model. Now, we could debate on what that bucket of money is, but
let's finite, whatever it is.
Let's be generous and call it $100 billion. Right?
Okay.
Bearing in mind that the vast majority of digital advertising is now some form of completion, because Google is a CPC model, which is a completion model.
So it's like completion, someone goes and actually transacts.
There's a conversion. There's a ROAS, there's a click, there's a conversion metric to it. But CPM is a tonnage model. I pay you X per 1,000 eyeballs.
Right.
In the hope that somebody likes what my message is. Now, because there's this infinite level of content this infinite level of content being created, but the budget for CPM is, if anything, stationary, you got a problem, because the economics of that model are going to collapse. So if a business model is built around the fact that you want a tonnage audience where you create over elaborate content, you clickbait for, information that isn't really real with the hope that you've got 1,000 eyeballs, actually your business model is fundamentally flawed, because there will not be the revenue to sustain that unless it's AI-driven content. And then again, AI-driven content is a level of trust, and all of a sudden you're really forcing people into a higher quality product for those that can afford a higher quality product. And be surprised what people pay for. People, it kind of surprises me how, when I was brought up, how could I have even think about affording a phone that was $1,000? So it was, my first car was $200. So people decide to spend their money where they feel that they get the best investment. So to me, an ad-supported model is fundamentally flawed, because AI content on top of UGC content is going to accelerate, and there will be a very significant number of publishers go out of business. And why will they go?
Those who can't successfully transition to a more subscriber-based or some other.
Correct. An ad-supported model is not going to be sustainable for a real traditional publisher.
Well, let's talk about another model within this. I know you mentioned two, and generally agree those are the only two that are like the primary. But there has been, in the last decade or two, the rise of affiliate and commerce. So there was sort of the golden age, you might say, of review sites in the 2010s, where you had a bunch of sites that were kind of like the Wirecutter, or what have you, like reviews.com, reviewed.com. I ran one of those. And, it's all premised on the idea that you're giving good buying advice on products, hopefully impartial, unbiased, and uninfluenced advice, trustworthy advice, to your point about trust. People would come, see your recommendations, then click through, transact, and you would get a slice of that, right? It still exists to some extent, but there's been sort of a panic, justified or not, to run away from this model because of what I sort of talked about with the AI disintermediation. It's kind of like, okay, well, if AI is just taking that information, summarizing it, and then giving the person not even just the link to the publisher, but maybe a link to the purchase, what is the benefit of even doing that content? So I wonder about a couple things. One, obviously the business model for publishers, and is there a way to do this in the AI world that might still make sense? But also I worry about the reader. Like, if a lot of people, a lot of sort of trustworthy brands get out of this business of commerce content because it isn't working anymore, what does that do to the quality of the information out there, and how good will AI be at recommending things and filtering it? What are your thoughts on that?
Do you remember, like a product called Which? Which was a paid for. Yeah, it was a paid for, review site.
Okay.
Where people,
like Consumer Reports kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly the same way you pay for. I want to know what are the 10 best blenders, and I don't want to be influenced by a model that could be influenced, and or whatever the product is you were looking for. So there is no question that consumers want experts' opinions, and frankly prefer free models. So I don't believe, and even if you look at Google, because when you look at the mathematical facts about AI engines, answer engines, Google's still by far the biggest and will continue to be the biggest driver of traffic on the planet. However, answer engines will devour a lot of those consumers. And the impact of the style of content that you're talking about, I think the reason there's been a huge growth in commerce-based content, because let's not forget, commerce-based content was not glamorous. It was very unsexy. If you go back to my days of the newspapers, direct response ads were like, oh my gosh, when you can't have any more advertising left in the world, you get to direct response ads. Then you had QVC, JVT, if you look at TV, was exactly the same. Direct response ads were never an attractive business model or commanded high value multiples of valuation. But I think that as people have become more, let's face it, the growth of digital shopping has continued to grow every year. I think that, and the way somebody purchases is, very high percentage. They rely on some form of digital research. I've been on record saying I think, commerce will continue to explode in 2026. And I think it'll explode more because what I would class as impulse purchase content is really working now. TikTok Shop, this is impulse purchase product. It was an area that disappeared from the publishing world where, look at Time magazine. It was like you really knew how many products or newspapers, how much revenue would be generated by the quality of your front page cover. That was impulse purchase product, right? So it was content that made people want to read, and then there was a business model associated to that. So, the good news is, or the bad news, whichever way you want to look upon it, is there is no question there is seismic change. There is buckets of, land grabs of success to be made. But clearly, to rely on old business models that were purely CPM, I think is extremely dangerous. I still think review sites will do very well. What you are finding, and you take this with the big, who's the biggest commerce company in North America? Amazon. Are they going to allow answer engines to have their content displayed free? What was it? Seek and desist on Perplexity.
Yeah.
So some of the moats are the merchants' content. So, but nobody really knows, and we work in commerce, nobody really knows what are those. There's going to be winners and losers. Walmart's model is slightly different to Amazon's model, and everybody's learning as they go along. I see that more money will be spent on commerce online. I think it'll be 30% more, which is huge. I think initially January 2026, I think it's like high 10% and above. So the growth is occurring, but it's unfair to just blame one technology, because that one technology is impacting more views on social media, that more views. So the whole dynamic is changing very, very rapidly. But, I don't think review sites are dead. Consumers want them, and there may be a model for people to pay for it.
Yeah, sounds like, to sort of try to summarize sort of some of what you were talking about. So it's like there's certainly growth, so there's opportunity, but because of the nature of just buying online now and the trust factors that we've talked about, I feel like there's maybe it's polarization. I don't know, but I do feel at least there's sort of two distinct opportunities on opposite sides of the spectrum. One is sort of the impulse stuff that you talked about, right? Like this sort of generally low cost, but it aligns with the experience you're in, whether that's TikTok, a publisher, or an AI engine. And if you can have a system that does that, you'll do well. The other side is probably what I would consider sort of higher stakes purchases, right? Which are like, okay, I really want something trustworthy here because it's either sort of expensive or it's going to lock me into something or what have you. So maybe this is like services like insurance or, just bigger ticket purchases. And then it's like, okay, well, I really want unbiased, trustworthy information here. And maybe I'm just getting out of an AI engine, I'm going to want to go deeper regardless. And then that'll sort of be an opportunity for publishers as well. Is that fair to sort of?
I've always liked the verticalization of content, because that's how the history of content started with the public ledger in 1763. Where all of a sudden everybody, if you like yachts, you want, specifics on yachts or angling or fishing or, sport, whatever the verticalization of content is. But let's take a product like a high-end set of golf clubs, right? I believe that there's still a journey for all of the new mechanisms to purchase. So I'll give an example. Maybe I want to test some different products. Maybe I want to review a bunch of different websites and review sites because and I'm going to use some examples. Am I going to buy the top end pings or am I going to buy the tailor-made? And then once I make that decision, as a consumer, this is because remember, there are three components of the publishing journey. There is the publisher and the business model and the technology involved in that. There is the merchant that wants to sell their products, whether it's advertising or affiliate. And there's the consumer that wants both, right? Once I've decided I want to purchase, I believe there will be a time where I could go, I want the tailor-made 979s or whatever they're called. And I want them in this size. I want them within a 50-mile radius, and I want to pick them up this afternoon. An answer engine could give you that answer. Google will not. And it will not on purpose. So I made an investment in a company called affiliate.com, which I'm not sure is the best name for it.
Good URL.
The reason I say not sure it's the best name for it is because actually what they've done is create the moat of 50,000 merchants and all of their catalogs and all of their SKUs and all of their just-in-time inventory and all of their prices, because there will be a time where I say, I don't know, my wife wants, say, Gucci size 36, and I need to get it today because I haven't shopped, and I need to get it delivered tomorrow. So all of a sudden, AI engines are only as good as the moat of data that comes from the merchant, and they may become shopping engines. But the web was brilliant for comparison, discovery, and an AI engine's not really as good as what's necessary, because even if I'm going to get an AI engine to give me the best 3 review sites, they're going to still be index and crawl the web to find out which those 3 best review sites are, which is highly likely I'll click through because they normally do entity extraction of a snippet, and I'll actually click through to get the information, so they'll still drive traffic. So I'm not sure I've explained that nice and clear. The funnel of purchase will still be, a digital purchase at the end, but the discovery look will be slightly different than what it was when it was just a blue link on a Google where everything was SEO or SEM. Quality becomes extremely important, not just, have I got my links set up and enough outbound links, because the review algorithms will become more important in that, which goes back to quality, volume, and trust, because it doesn't matter which engine you're going to use, they're still going to use an algorithm that will take into account opinion from consumers.
Well, and also I guess the nuances of how the AI works and sort of filters things, the whole idea of GEO and how to optimize for that is an emergent field. And I feel like with the different deals and the different kinds of blocking, we're getting a very sort of fragmented experience. Like if you use one particular engine, whether it's Perplexity or ChatGPT or Gemini or even other sort of things like Google has, obviously not just Gemini, but AI mode and AI overviews. You have all these sort of different experiences, and I can even add to that agents, which are kind of new, but as they grow, we were talking just before we started recording about Comet, right? I'm using Comet more and more to do things, and I don't know where it's getting its context for some of the things I'm doing, but there's maybe that indicates a different sort of trust equation there. But this idea that I could sort of go into my experience and get totally different recommendations from what you do, not just because of personalization, but because of all this sort of back end GEO and how agents respond to it. is a little weird. It's a little different from, I feel like, the open web now. And I don't know how you account for that at any level, let alone the publisher level. But is it just something that's going to shake out, and you sort of find out where your audience is? I mean, how do you think about this increasing fragmentation? Do you see it getting worse, better, and how is it going to affect the funnels we're talking about?
I'm a believer that conversational commerce with retail media commerce are going to explode.
Hmm.
And we built some of the first natural language voice technology in the world, and it was licensed to government. And I was, as an advocate, is that consumers are not going to use that, and they weren't going to use it because it wasn't in the right form yet. And I think it is now. Agents are an explosion,
Hmm.
and they're never going to go away. They're going to be, I've had 4 children, but frankly, a 3-year-old is going to be talking to, an AI agent in the living room, asking them everything from things for their homework through to philosophy, through to what to buy and where to get it. And can it be delivered? And can I have it this afternoon? So these things are real and they will be everywhere. How it shakes out, none of us have a crystal ball. We're a giant experiment. When the phone manufacturers and the telecommunications companies were analyzing and launching their products, none of them really thought text was going to take on then. And all of a sudden, everyone wanted to text with each other. So how people interact with the engines will be, voice, natural language, or probably more, like I'll write a memo and I'll send a small character text into my engine. But, all that everything does is make everything easier for a consumer to make a purchase. And, if you look at it from a different perspective, what was it 10 years ago? The average consumer would be spending 4.5 hours, according to Nielsen ratings, on a TV, monged out watching content. I would argue that they're reading more content than they've ever read. I would argue that they're spending more time in content than they have ever done. Oh yeah, okay, there's more content available, but it means that, content's never going to die, and quality will raise to the top and it will be paid for. Because I think I believe 2026 is a good example of that trust. I call a lot of things in COVID the great accelerator. It was the accelerator of bad business models. It was the accelerator of good ones. Because change was forced, right? And I think 2026 is a forced change where if your quality wasn't good enough or your product wasn't good enough, and I mean this from a publisher's perspective, then you will go bust, right? But if you are, super determined in the quality of your product and able to move and be nimble on the changes of your model, then actually you will flourish. Because the reality is consumers are spending more time on content now than they ever have.
What is your just general advice for a publisher today? Because I think they're kind of like, we're talking in kind of a high level here on these nuances of commerce and media and business models, but a lot of publishers are just thinking block or don't block. You know what I mean? Like, I feel like there's sort of like they're still kind of at that, like, oh, should I let AI engines do it or should I block? Because there's been a few studies lately about how many of the major sites are now at least attempting to block all the major engines. I don't know how successful they are. But is that even a fundamentally flawed way of looking at it? Like, if someone comes to you like, hey, should I block these things or not, regardless of their business model, or maybe it is dependent on that, but what is your advice?
I guess it's hard to answer the question directly because there's so many different types of publisher. You're talking about news, you're talking about, very definitive vertical content.
Well, let's go over them. Let's say news, commerce, etc. Specialized media.
If you look at news, paid walls were too early in the business cycle. So these paid now I still don't think they've used micropayments correctly yet.
Yeah.
And I think
you
they
get a
will
lot of
now.
support for that point of view.
Yeah, I mean, I created a piece of technology called the Purple Pass that we wanted to license, and we started with the FT and a bunch of different other publishers. And frankly, it was like talking to people that as if you had two heads. So, do you not realize if I get sent an article from a friend that says you want to read this, and then it's got a paid wall that says I've got to spend $250 for a 12-month subscription I have no interest in, or I could give you $5 to read one article. If you give me that method to purchase, I will buy it, but I'm not paying $250. And when you did the math, the publisher would have made a fortune more money because it was just in time content. It was extremely relevant. And the only challenge was micropayment. But the other challenge was the psychologies of the people that ran publishing companies, that they actually got their model wrong. I mean, think of it. Micropayment to, think of the history of all publishing. I'm going to make something up like one photograph of a Kardashian gets all this traffic. If she gives you $5 to see the whole edit of all the photos, she would make a lot of money. That's content, right? And journalism and news, I think, were too early in their paywalls. So many of them were, oh my gosh, we can't make money. But I think that, if you classify things like the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Financial Times, credible high-level journalists, if they invest in the journalism product now, they also deal with micropayment because they'll make more money with micropayment and subscription, you'll see them grow, not decline. I believe they'll grow. And, they'll go back to what they should be. And that is, human society requires people that aren't going to be bought to write content, right? It needs really good analytical, whether it's elected representatives all the way down to what's the best product, right? It needs true analysis and opinion. And, I think news will come back with that model. And it's just had 10, 15, maybe 20 years of really difficult challenges. But, I think that model will actually expand in the next 10 years, not decrease. And they'll make more money, and they will not be ad supported.
And speaking of micropayments, do you think pay per crawl is a part of this? Which is to say, it may not necessarily be a human visitor, but like a bot, and that will like make a micropayment every time they use an article for context?
There are many people in technology that have, thought this model will work, pay per crawl. I'm not one of them. I don't believe there's a copyright kind of model associated to that. I have looked at it from a business model perspective. Could I provide the technology that enabled that to occur? I just don't see that being a real long-term model.
Why not?
Kind of a Napster kind of model. I just don't think technically you can get everything in place to make sure it's actually going to work properly.
So it's like not really enforceable. Like basically,
it's like one of those things. It's like one of those things. Is if everybody's in, it's going to work. But if half of them aren't in, it's not going to work. So it isn't a technical problem. It's like we're all in or we're not all in, and there's no way in the world you can get consensus to be all in. So I don't believe that's going to be. I just think that the devaluing of the CPM is the reason that the business model breaks in ad-supported models. It's not because people will buy the ads, but now they can buy 1,000 times more ads with the same amount of money, which means that devalues in its own right. So as a publisher, you can't rely on that model. And in history, frankly, there weren't really that many ad-supported only models. If you take news, it was only ad-supported news models, and they didn't really get much credibility anyway. Metro, if you go back in time, and other, products, the paid for products always were able to command an audience, and an audience was a demographic. A demographic becomes back to a wall-modeled, high-based ad model. Give me 1 million people that buy The Economist, and I will give you a lot of money to advertise in it. Why? Because of the demographic, not because everybody on the planet can read it.
Quick speed round question. Do you think Google will at some point make AI mode the default?
No.
Why not?
Business model.
Just
Always go with the motive. Their business model is built on a 2002 model that is highly inefficient, but it's still $200 billion in revenue.
even if customer behavior starts to sort of steer that way?
Can't see that they're going to have. They're a public company. They're not, let's change the model, chew it up, and create a new one. They have quarterly numbers to hit. And, why did they not want people? Why did they want everyone forced into browsers? Because that was a model to ensure the web still generated clicks and links and clicks and links. And in essence, it's built around the inefficiency of its business model. I don't want you to get the purchase off one click. I want you to do 6 different clicks because I get 6 times the revenue.
So do you see AI overviews as kind of throwing people a bone for the user experience? Because those are reducing clicks, right?
I'm one of the few people that know the mathematics behind search. And surprisingly, you can talk to some of the most influential people in the media world and they really don't even understand how it works. The average query, the average consumer will use a search engine via a browser. They don't use search engines. They use browsers to access search engines 1,000 times a year, 3 queries per user per day, right? Is the average mathematics. Obviously, there are whales and there are people that you do it less. Out of those, 988 of them are worthless. So in those queries, you'll get answer engine, you'll get beautiful answers, Gemini, etc. But the 12 out of the 1,000 are monetizable queries. And if you look at organic search on Google now, doesn't exist on one of those 12. On the format of a mobile device, for example, those are only paid listings. And you will not get answers in those queries.
Switching gears really quick, because I need to get your take on this. So ChatGPT is introduced to advertising, and OpenAI is going down that route. It's become kind of a interesting bifurcation of the market. You have Claude and now Perplexity even, which was big on advertising a couple of years ago, is now getting out of it. How do you think this is going to play out within AI and not just chatbots, but just broadly advertising being part of an AI experience?
It's a great question, Pete, because I was thinking about this yesterday, because I think some of those engines are making huge mistakes. And ironically, it's the word advertising. So let's go back in time for a second. We're in 2022. And in 2022, who was the king of publishing? Well, if you go by valuation, it was Yahoo. It was a portal. The portal is king. Banners, buttons, rich media. You had more chance of being kicked to death by a donkey of every of them converting. But the reality is that was the business model, right? And then along came this little engine called Google. And Google were very clear they did not do advertising. What they did was a mechanism to give an intent user, i.e. a user that has put a query into their engine with an intent to discover a purchase, the ability to access that content. That was not defined as advertising.
Right.
And where these companies are making very significant mistakes is they're mixing the portal with an intent to purchase. Okay. Because fundamentally, I do not believe an advertising model will work with an answer engine. But fundamentally, I think it will convert 10 times more purchases than Google. Why? Because when I want a Patagonian backpack at the best price that can be delivered to me tomorrow, I want to use an answer engine. But I don't call it advertising.
Right. It's not the ad that accompanies the query. It's what
the
you
ability to
get.
purchase. They
Yeah.
should be shopping engines. And
Right.
believe me, I know all the mathematics of when Bing came into the market and how Google, what Google did, and Bing spent $8 billion, trying to promote, and they didn't realize the only queries they wanted were the 12 per 1,000 queries per user. Those 12 are shopping queries, and some of those engines could own shopping because Google can't. And that's why Google doesn't, because it destroys its own business model. Whereas some of those engines, and that's why I invested in affiliate.com, is, if you had UShop or Perplexity Shop, and it purely is an answer engine to shop, it will crush conversion, but there's no advertising.
So as we wrap up here, I always try to ask folks what they're hopeful about and what they might be concerned about as AI is reshaping our ecosystem and changing discovery, changing commerce, the economics of publishing, everything we've talked about. So what are you hopeful about? What keeps you up at night?
I've had a long history of interest in public policy and done a lot of work in that. So, when people talk about AI technology could destroy the planet, to me, that's more about the way content could impact a democracy and vote people in that are dangerous to humankind. So I'm very concerned, but also kind of optimistic, and maybe I'm too optimistic, in that we're going to go through a lot of change when you're talking about a third of the world's population may not have a job, and they are what I would class as middle income earners. There's radical policy changes that are going to happen over the next 10 years. Now, that means there's the potential on one end of the spectrum to anarchy and civil war and all sorts of different problems. But on the other end of the spectrum, there's an outcome where, you could have a form of utopia where people could, spend a lot of their time not, working themselves into the ground because there's no jobs, but working far less or becoming experts in certain areas that they find passionate and really enjoy. So, but that transition keeps me awake at night, because is it anarchy or is it, and what can you do to help that? So I have interests in companies that, I'm an investor and owner in a product called the International Centre for Parliamentary Studies. We train government civil servants in some of those areas. It's not a big business from a monetization perspective, but it is like, how do you help deal with big problems for consumers and maybe, steer technology into that? So that's what keeps me awake at night and also keeps me excited, because frankly, if the wrong things happen, terrible things can occur. And if the right things happen, frankly, hopefully we get a better, more just society that is more open and because after all, we're all from Earth. And as I joke in policy, the way you get global peace on Earth is start war against Mars, because that's what politicians do. They've got to pick an enemy, and if artificially they picked Earth, then Earth picked Mars, all Earthens would all love each other. So.
All right. Well, interplanetary war is not where I thought we were going to end this conversation, but it's a very interesting place to go. I hope, whatever the mechanism is, we do steer toward that more utopian vision. Colin, this has been great. So thanks so much for coming and taking some time and sharing your thoughts with us on the future of media, publishing, and, the world.
Wonderful. Thanks, Pete.
Thanks for listening to my conversation with Colin Jeavons. The Media Copilot is a podcast, and it'd be fantastic if you could give the show a star rating if you're listening on Spotify, a like and subscribe if you're on YouTube, and a review of the show if you're on Apple. All those things really do help the show because it'll put our podcast in front of more people. Media Copilot podcast is produced by Michelle Musso and Ryan Huntington of Musso Media. Look for their link in the show notes, and don't forget to subscribe to the Media Copilot newsletter as well. Thanks again for being here, following the podcast, and I'll be seeing you in the future.